The recent update in Lightroom is pretty big. I was going to do the photo critique video this week, but because these changes were a game changer, I just had to let you all know about these changes. So if you're waiting for the photo critique video, that's coming next Thursday. And if it's already a week later, it'll be linked in the corner and in the description. And if you're new here, I do photo tutorials, critiques, and on-location shoots. Everything to help you and your photography. So be sure to subscribe. Adobe have really overhauled the top panel in Lightroom in the library module, and it looks a little bit different to what it's been like for a while. Some of the tools are fantastic, but it does take a bit of getting used to. Like before, there is the crop tool, and this is very similar, as is the spot removal tool. And then there's the red eye removal tool as well. Then we get onto the local adjustments, which have been combined into this one button, and the button is now called masking. If you click on this, it gives you a lot of different options. Before we had the linear graduated tool, the radial tool, and the brush tool. Now we have those, as well as select subject and select sky. And the range tool has been brought up to this panel as well. It did used to live at the bottom of this drop down panel, and you had to go all the way down to the bottom to find it. This was one of my annoyances, so it's great that they brought everything up to this top panel. With all of these tools, there is a pop-up window next to this. It looks a little bit scrappy, but I suppose they didn't have anywhere else to put it. But the good thing with this is that it keeps everything up here next to those local selection tools. So everything is in that top right hand corner. Now for any of you that are worried about local edits that you've done previously to this update, don't worry. They will all be here in this new panel, and they won't have changed at all. They will just sit in this new layout, but they will be exactly the same as where you left off. It'll just ask you to save a new catalog for this new update when you do open that catalog for the first time in this version 11. So you would in theory have the old catalog and would be able to go back if needed. But I think once you get used to this, you'll see the benefits of being able to have a very detailed mask selection and a very detailed way of doing those local edits. A mask selection, adjustment layer, or whatever you want to call it, is just an area where you're going to make changes, and you're specifying what shape that area is with these tools. To show you what that shape looks like, they have to give you overlay options. This isn't changing the image to that color, it's just showing you the shape of the mask that will make the changes once you start moving the sliders in the drop-down menu on the right-hand side. Let's say you've taken a photo, but you want to bring down the exposure in the sky. Originally in Lightroom, you would have had to reduce the highlights. So you'd have come down to this bottom panel and pushed the highlights down. But then that would have reduced the highlights in the whole photo. Then with later versions, you'd paint in the sky with that brush tool, or maybe pull down a linear gradient tool and add a range mask when that was added to Lightroom. Now all you have to do is click on Select Sky. It might take a while to process, especially if you have an older machine, but once it's done its thing, it will now select the whole sky for you. And it will detect trees and other objects that protrude into the sky, as long as there is enough contrast between them. Now I thought this one might confuse it a little bit with the reflections, but it actually did an okay job. When you do select it, this panel will pop up to the left of the histogram. Open it up with the two chevrons if it isn't expanded already, and then here you can adjust your mask. So you can see it's selected the sky. I've got this red overlay and I've got this show overlay ticked. You do have different overlays that you can select. So if you click on these three dots here, it's on color overlay at the moment. But if you're used to Photoshop, you can go white on black. So as you can see, you have lots of different ways to show the mask. From the red mask that you might already be familiar with from previous versions of Lightroom to the black and white looking mask like in Photoshop. You just want to choose what you like the best, but it's great that they've given us all of these different options. Also with the color overlay, if you click on the red square, you can change this to any color you want. When you do click on it, it will come up with this color chart with millions of variations of colors. As I've said, I prefer the white on black overlay, but when using something like a radial filter, you can't see the image below. So when I am doing this, I'll just switch back to the red overlay so I can place the mask over the part of the image that I want to. Now let's say you want to select the land and not the sky. You can actually invert this mask and it will select the opposite to the sky. So very quickly you can build these masks up. You can have one mask for the sky and then another mask for the land, and then do local adjustments on either of those parts separately. So I have the mask for the sky there now. So what I can do is click on these 3 tags and I go duplicate mask 1. So I've got mask copy. If I click on this, it gives this subsection to the mask copy, which is sky 1. If I then click on these, I click on invert, and that is the land. So this first one is the ground, the second one is the sky. Remember, when the mask is black and white like this, it'll change what is white, it won't change what is black. When you don't have any changes made, it will show that overlay, but as soon as you've made changes in this drop-down panel, it'll just show those changes. And this is quite good as well, because before you could make changes or you could make a mask for your image and you wouldn't be able to see where it was until you selected the overlay. So I'll just show you with this. You can see that's changing the sky. Obviously you wouldn't change it this much, but I'm just showing that that mask just changes that sky. And then if we go on to the other one, which is the ground, again, if I change that, you can see it changes the ground. So I'd maybe increase the shadows a little bit on the ground, and then increase the contrast and maybe increase the texture as well. And then in the sky, I'd probably reduce the sharpness a little bit, drop the texture a little bit to make it a bit softer, drop the highlights a bit, but then add some contrast, something like that. But you can see it's a very powerful tool. To invert your mask, you could go to the subsection of the mask, click on the 3 dots and find it in that drop-down menu, or just select the subsection and find it over here between the tool strip and the adjustment sliders. This is the easiest way to invert the mask, and I do use this a lot. I kept on clicking on the 3 dots of the main mask layer and was wondering where it was for a while. It would be good if there was an invert in that main mask, so you could make lots of changes and then invert the whole thing, but maybe that'll come in a future update. This pop-up panel will disappear if you click out of the app, but when you click back into Lightroom, it'll reappear. Now the great thing with this and with all of these masking tools is that you can add or subtract to that mask. So before, you may have had a gradient or a radial mask and then maybe wanted to add a little bit more to that mask, but then you'd have to start again with a new brush tool mask and try and match the two. Now you can build up that mask bit by bit. So here it's selected the engine on the back of the boat when I selected the sky. So this shot did confuse it a little bit, but now I can subtract from that mask and paint this area in. So if I click on that, I click on subtract and brush, I'll make sure auto mask is checked. And what that does is just find the hard contrasty edges. So now what I can do is paint over this engine, just make the brush a bit bigger. I'll do a very scrappy, quick selection, but you can see it's taking the mask off the engine or the motor. I suppose it's an engine, isn't it? So now you can see in that sky mask, I've got sky 1 and brush 1. So it's labeled them differently. And then if you look at the brush one, it's got a minus figure next to it. So it's subtracting that from the mask. So that's just a reference for you so you know which one is being taken away and which one's being added. So if I hover my mouse over the brush, it'll just show me what's being taken away and it'll highlight the brush icon here. Also in these buttons, as well as in that main drop-down menu, you can find the range mask, which used to live at the bottom of that local adjustments panel like I mentioned earlier. So here you can adjust what colors or levels of brightness will be affected by the mask. Now the great thing with that range mask is that it'll give you an eyedropper and you can click on the luminance or the color that you want to be affected or you want to be subtracted from that mask. It's such a powerful tool and you can build up to it and add to it, but it can get quite confusing as well. If you look what I've done now, I've added to this sky mask a luminance range and it's kind of selected all of this here. So it is very easy to get kind of muddled up and to get confused a little bit with it. So I'm just going to delete that range mask now because that just messed everything up. Now I'll show you range masks a little bit later on in the video, so make sure to keep watching. Next with select subject, this does exactly that. As long as your subject is pronounced in the frame, it will do a fantastic job. And sometimes, even if the boundaries aren't that good, it'll still do a really good job. So I've clicked on the new mask button and then select subject. Again, it takes a while to detect that subject, but just let it do its thing and it will do it really well. Like before, once you've selected it, you can add or subtract to and from that mask with any of the other masks. So I have this one of me. You can see it selected me really well. Even down here at the bottom, you can see the background is not selected. So it does an absolutely fantastic job. So if I just change it to white on black, and if we zoom in, you can see it's really picked out the hairs really well on my head. Now I have that mask selected, and let's say I want to subtract this KISS logo off the front of my t-shirt. What I could do in theory, if it was one solid color, is click on subtract and then color range and then select it. However, because it fades from orange to yellow, it's a lot harder to do with this image. So like I've already done, I'd select the brush tool and then paint it out. And as long as auto mask was selected, it would find the edges quite well. Now, if I change the mask, I'll just do some extreme changes. You can see it's changing everything apart from that color on that KISS and apart from the background as well. Also, if you want to select just the background, you can use this tool to select your subject and then just invert the mask, and then your background is selected. And then you can edit the background and the subject separately. So you can see I've just inverted it so the background is selected now. Now if I right click on the mask and duplicate mask 1, that'll give me mask 1 copy. Then I select that sub mask, click on the 3 dots and uncheck invert. Now this first one is me and the second one is the background. So with the background, I could maybe darken it down a bit, make it a bit more contrasty, deepen the shadows so you can see it's really affecting that background. And then with me, I think the highlights are a little bit too much, so I could knock the highlights down a bit, add a bit more contrast, add a bit more texture maybe. Could make myself look really rough, add a load of clarity. Let's see what happens when we do this. So if I really wanted to, I could make myself look really grungy and just chuck the clarity and texture all the way to the right without affecting that background whatsoever. And you can switch between the two then. So I'm back onto the background. Maybe I wanted to make the background black and white. You could do that as well. So you really have a lot of options here. That looks pretty horrendous, but you can see the power of what you can do with these masks. If you've made changes to the mask, but you don't know how it's affecting your image, just click on the eye icon. This is very much like in Photoshop. When the eye has a strike line through it, it will hide the mask. And when it's just the eye, it's visible. This is very good because you can click between the two, seeing how much or how little you've changed the actual finished image. If you haven't made any changes to the mask, it will just show the mask color overlay, whichever overlay option you've selected. Also, it doesn't just have to be a portrait. If I select this next one, which is this boat, I can then use this select subject to isolate the boat and then change the color of the boat. I can make it more or less contrasty. You can do whatever I want to that boat. So you can see the mask is over the boat now. So I can increase or decrease the exposure of that boat. If I come down here to hue, you can see I can change it to a green boat, a purple boat or a pink boat or a red boat. And I keep saying it, but there is so much that you can do with this tool. And you can really isolate parts of your photograph. And again, I can duplicate the mask and then invert it and then just change the color or change the look of the sea in the background. With range masking, before you'd have to use it within one of the 3 older masks, but now it can be a standalone mask. For example, if we look at this image, it's a drone shot I took one morning over the south of the island of Phuket. I edited this in the older version of Lightroom and I was a bit lazy when it came to my gradient selection. But that gradient selection is still there and it's in this new pop-up window. I'll delete that mask and start again. So I'm going to choose luminance range and it will present me with this bar or luminance slider. Now watch what happens when I take the mouse over the image. It gives me an eyedropper and I can select different parts of the image with different luminance values. which is a fancy way of saying different brightness levels. I have my overlay set to white on black, as I prefer this as it gives me the best impact of what the mask is affecting. If I click on the dark island, it's selecting a dark luminance range, and over here on the luminance range map, or that slider, it has pulled the square over the dark end of that slider. There are two parts to this: the main square, which you can adjust, and these tags on the bottom. The main square is the brightness or luminance range it will be affecting, and then the tags at the bottom relate to the fall off or fade off of that mask. So if you have the tag right next to the edge of the box, it's a harsh fall off, going straight from white to black in the mask and going right from 100% changes to 0 changes. This relates to a mask with a harsh edge. And then the further away from the edge of the square this tag is, it will give you a softer, more gradual fall off. So this is great to be able to really refine the edge of that mask. In some circumstances, you'll want that to be really harsh, and in other circumstances, you'll want it to fall off gradually. Now with this pop-up box, you might be thinking it's annoying covering part of your image, especially in this case where the changes I'm making are in that top right hand corner. But you can move this to wherever you want, so you can get it out of the way. However, when you come out of the mask and then go back into the mask, it will reappear in that default position in the top right hand corner. Now you can link it to this right hand column, so if you don't like it over your photo, just grab it by the tag at the top and drop it just below the tools panel. This is the only place you can really put it permanently, and then it will stay there whether you come out of it or not. The only downside to this is that it will push the sliders down and off the bottom of the screen. I almost wish we could drop it anywhere in Lightroom. On the left hand side, on the right hand side, no matter where we wanted it, it would drop it, but we can't. Next, with the color range mask. With this image, you'd think if you selected the color range and then selected the blue in the sky, it would work just fine. But there is a lot of blue in the shadows in the landscape. And just on a side note, this is why I prefer the white on black overlay. If I just switch back to the red overlay, you can see it looks like it selected the whole image. But when I switch back to the white on black overlay, you can see it has selected a lot of the image, but to a lesser degree over the land, but more so in the shadows, which figures as this was early in the morning and the shadows are very blue. Now this is another great example of how I can build on a mask. This mask as is would be pretty useless unless you wanted to adjust the blue in the whole of the image, but you could do this in the HSL slider panel. I just want to adjust the blue in the sky, so I'll click subtract, then select sky, and then click on invert. And now apart from the top parts of the mountain shadows, it has pretty much selected just the blue tones in the sky. The Radial tool works pretty much the same way, but now it has 2 circles. I'm pretty sure it only had 1 before. Everything inside the inner circle will be affected 100% by any changes that you make. Anything between the 2 lines will drop from 100% down to 0%. And it looks like it hit 0 just outside the outer line for some weird reason. You can change this with a feather slider like before, but now you can grab this orange ball as well on the inner circle and then change it here. This will change the amount that is affected 100%. So like I said before, with the Radial tool, when using the white on black overlay, you can't see the image below. So a color overlay works much better here. But then if I was to add to this mask, say with a color range, and I'll just select white, you can kind of see what's happening with the red overlay. But then if I switch back to the white on black overlay, you can really see what's happening with this mask. You have the Radial mask and then the color range mask, all in one. And if you hover the cursor over one of the tags on the image, it will show you the Radial mask on its own and then the color range mask on its own. But any adjustments you make will affect all of this as it is one mask. If you want to separate these, just duplicate the masks and then delete the opposing ones in each of these new masks. So in the first one, I'll delete the Radial gradient, and in the second one, I'll delete the color range. Now I can make changes to them separately. If you have 2 separate masks you want to combine, just click on the sub mask of one of them and drag it to the main mask of the other one, and then they'll be combined. Now it could get quite confusing if you have a load of different masks, say one for the sky, one for the ground, one for the subject, and so on and so forth. You're going to get confused as to which one does what. and it would get quite frustrating because you'd have to click on them to find which one was which. So they've given us the option to name the masks. Then you won't lose track of what is what. I remember with the older versions, you'd have lots of different dots over the screen when you had multiple masks, and you'd have to hover over or click on them to see which one did what. So this just seems a little bit more organized. To change the name of the mask, just double click on it and type in whatever you want. So these were originally mask 1, mask 2 and mask 3. You can also change the names of the sub-masks as well, again by double clicking on them. It's great that they've given us this because all you need to do now is click on the mask button and then it will give you the list of all of the different masks, and if you've named them correctly, you'll know exactly what each of them will do. Now these are 3 separate masks and I built them all from the sky selection tool. So say for instance with the paragliders, if I switch it across to white on black, you can see just those paragliders are selected. For the landscape, that's just selected, although it is a little bit fuzzy with those clouds in the background because it couldn't quite find that horizon properly. And the sky is just an inverted version of that, with the paragliders taken away from the sky. Remember with masks, what is black, it doesn't change, and what is white, it does change. And then every gradient of gray between the two, it changes it less and less. Now the power of editing is in local adjustments. This really gives me so much control over how I make changes to my photographs. It will take a bit of getting used to, but if you play around with it and make lots of different masks for all of your different photos, you'll pick it up pretty quickly. It does take time to get honed in with this and to work out how it works and how it can trip you up. But if you just edit a load of photos, you will get used to it quite quickly. Now there are other changes as well. These include a lot more presets, and they've called them premium presets to probably make us feel special. So if you do use presets already as a starting point and then edit from there, there are more of these to choose from. So if I get rid of the navigator and open up presets, you can see there's so many more, and each of these have a drop-down menu, just so you can make those basic changes and then work up from there. Also, when you sync any adjustments across a series of photographs, it seems to process those a bit quicker than before. Again, this all depends on how quick your computer is, but they are trying to address the speed issues in Lightroom. Now, I only did it with 3 images there, but it does seem to process those sync changes a lot quicker than it used to in the older version. With the metadata in the library module, this can be organized a little bit better. You can choose what's in the list and what isn't, so you can just see what you need to and nothing else. So if you change the metadata to default, then you'll have this customize button at the bottom. Click on this and then you can choose exactly what goes in this list. I mostly use capture time, my primary settings, which are shutter speed, aperture and ISO, the focal length, and then the 35mm equivalent, just in case I'm using a crop censored camera and I want to know that full frame equivalent focal range. But you can have as much or as little in here as you want. If you use the filter system in the library module, they've refined the date system as well, so you can quickly find what you're looking for. That is, if you remember the date that you took the photograph on. Now, I mentioned earlier that it creates a new catalog when you first start this version up with an older catalog. This is because they have changed the architecture to optimize the catalog and save on storage. So basically your catalog will be smaller. So it's good that they're addressing this as well. There's nothing worse than editing a photo and then your computer pops up with a message, your hard drive is almost full. And then everything kind of starts to grind to a halt and you can't really do much with it. Now there is one annoying thing for me that I found with this new update, but I'm sure I'll kind of get over it with time. I am used to the crop tool being right here at the edge of this panel. Now, because there's less in this panel, they've moved it further across to the middle. So what I have found is if I'm working on an image and I go to the crop tool, I kind of quickly go to this corner without thinking about it and click there because it's just muscle memory, and then realize it's just a little bit further in. But as I said, I'm sure this will go with time as I get more used to this layout. All in all, this is a great update, and it seems like Lightroom is becoming more and more a standalone editing and cataloging tool with less of a need to round trip to Photoshop. I've found that I'm going across to Photoshop less and I'm just editing everything that I need to and making the changes that I need to in Lightroom. I have been using it quite a lot for the last week and have really noticed a big improvement with my editing times and speed of doing all of these local adjustments. I'm guessing it's because of the likes of Luminar and Photoshop introducing sky replacements and things like that. So Adobe wants to keep Lightroom up to speed with at least masking. I was half thinking that they would introduce sky replacements in this Lightroom update, but they're keeping that to Photoshop for now. And if any of you have watched my channel for a while, you'll know my thoughts on sky replacements already. And if you don't, you need to watch this video next. In it, I go into what I think is too much when it comes to editing. So make sure you're not an over editor and go and watch it now.